40 years ago, things were very different than they are today. MTV was catching on. Atari was very popular. We didn't have all the constant news in our face, but our social media, we had that. That was hanging out with our friends and family. Some of the things we used to do most definitely probably get you arrested today. I mean, the safety standards in cars were pretty well absent. The regulations were more like suggestions than actual rules or laws. Nobody wore seatbelts. Many people just wondered why they were even there. I mean, as a kid, you could sit in the middle of the bench seat up front and you'd play with the radio. And if you wanted to see over the tall dash, you would just stand up. Nobody cared. Hell, a lot of us, our dad or our mom, mostly our dad, let just sit in their lap so you could steer the car while you're driving down the road. It was also common, very common, to see the back just packed with kids in a station wagon, or maybe a whole bunch of us in the bed of a truck. Our seats were available, but rarely would you ever see one in a car. In fact, usually the car was just packed with kids, and you'd have so many kids that it was just easier for parents a lot of times to just leave them in the car while they went into the store to go shop. I mean, they'd roll the windows down, the kids would be just fine. You'd have the older kid that would know how to open the door and would get the other kids out. They wouldn't have to worry about being too hot. We're also much more active in the outdoors. It was very common just to tell your parents you're going outside to play. And we would disappear for hours, sometimes the entire day. And it was always easier to tell where all the neighborhood kids were just by glancing at someone's yard. As you'd count the collection of bicycles laid in the front yard or in the driveway because the kids just rode up and dropped them. And if that wasn't seen, then most of us would just knock on our friends' doors, see if they were home and if they wanted to come outside. I mean, if you went around riding bikes, you really didn't wear a helmet back then. Never. Most people, you couldn't even find them really in the stores to buy. They just weren't that popular. And when you could find them, most kids didn't want to wear them, neither with the elbow pads or the knee pads, because it was considered an honor and cool to show off your latest injuries and skinned knees. If you happened to be too far from home and it was getting late, no problem. We would just look for one of the many payphones all over the place, and we would call for a ride. It was simple as that. And if you didn't have a change, no problem. Your parents knew when they got the collect call where to come because you'd get them. And it would be things like, hey, you have a collect call I'm at the community center. Do you accept the charges? They would just say no, and then they would be on their way to come and pick you up and load up the bikes and bring you home. Otherwise, if that didn't happen, your parents just expected you to be home by the time all the street lights came on and it was dark. Smoking was still very big. And parents smoked in the home and in the car with the kids in it. And secondhand smoke was just something that everyone had to live with. I mean, most people weren't worried about being exposed to it or exposing kids to it. It wasn't uncommon to see people just smoking away in restaurants. And most restaurants probably didn't even have a smoking section. They just had regular area, and things were so different back then. Cigarette machines were everywhere. They were in front of stores and restaurants, hotel lobbies. You had no ID or anything to check. You just put in your change, pull the knob, and bam, out came a package of cigarettes. So anybody could get them anytime they wanted. There's also a time when kids would run to the store for their parents to pick up essentials, to go get that pack of cigarettes that mom and dad didn't want to leave the house for. All they did was send a note. And that note was like a blank check afterwards for you to buy whatever you wanted at that store, and nobody worried about it and nobody cared. How most people were about smoking is the same way a lot were about alcohol. Alcohol wasn't something that kids enjoyed or did regularly. Many of us tasted it just to see what it was like when parents offered it. And the latchkey kid, being a latchkey kid was perfectly fine. Parents were busy working and doing other things, so it was quite common to see kids at home by themselves, watching our younger siblings until they got home. I mean, our parents just thought that if we were old enough to dial the important phone numbers and to dial 911, we were more than responsible enough to be at home alone. Punishment, punishment when we were kids was also something that was completely different and was viewed entirely different than it is today. I mean, you had paddling and swats from parents, family members, teachers. It was all considered completely reasonable. In fact, you'd sometimes even have neighbors get you. And that was just accepted at the time. Everybody raised the child. Now, if the kids misbehaved or were disrespectful, punishment, believe me, it was swift and painful. Now, let's talk allergies compared to today. Peanut allergies, they were definitely around back then. We still brought peanut butter sandwiches to school and peanut products to school. Peanut and other allergy bans, weren't a thing. EpiPens didn't hit the market until about 87. So if you had an allergy, you just had to hope you didn't die. And the number one rule at school when it came to peanuts is never trade lunch with another kid. Then you didn't have to worry. Now, teenagers, Gen X kids in the 80s, you didn't have Instagram or Snapchat. Your social media was hanging out at the mall with your friends. You could do a little shopping, eating, a whole lot of hanging out. Parents would allow their kids to roam the mall all day, hours on end by themselves, and nobody worried. I mean, kids may still go to the mall today, but it's not like it was. And most times now, if they hung around, they'd probably be accused of loitering and someone would call the police. I mean, the world has gotten very pansified. And parties were something that many people had long before there was a vaccine, specifically chicken pox parties. Most people felt it was best just to get it out of the way so you didn't have to worry about it later. So if one kid in class started showing signs and went down and missed school, you guarantee your parent was probably going to send you over there. They'd gather all the kids together who hadn't gotten it before for a good old-fashioned party and see if anybody got it. Also, with Gen X kids were movies. There used to only be PG and R until 1984 when they created the PG-13 rating. See, since people realized there was a huge gap between PG and R. And if you take a look back at movies like Airplane, that was considered PG, and you'll understand how wide the gap was because the movie was filled with a lot of adult humor in it and even showed nudity. Now, back in 1984, the film Red Dawn with Patrick Swayze and Charlie Sheen became the first movie ever to get a PG-13 rating. They wanted to originally rate it R. They argued for a new rating to allow them to have the movie in theaters. Now, over the last 40 years, there have been many changes, not just in technology, but in regulations on what we can and cannot do. I mean, most of you younger generations, you don't realize how many changes have taken place during the 80s and have continued to do so that have affected everything that happens today based on what we did when we were younger, stuff we got away with, the stuff we didn't get away with. And a lot of safety regulations are because of some of the injuries that the odd person had back in the day. Anyway, hey everyone, I thank you all for coming down memory lane with me. Give me a like, give me a subscribe. Come on, you want to hang around, you want more. Let's get this going. Keep it up, people. Anyway, this is Drac saying, hey, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again later. Bye-bye for now.